Hello everybody, welcome back to the Center for Off-Road Research, Shenanigans, and Science Technical Division. And today we're looking at the MoFo RC Cantilever shock set. They're called the Roboflex shock kit, and you can see they do weigh 3.5 grams. It just dropped to 4 as I said it just to make me look bad, but it's 3.5, and that's what I've measured it multiple times. There, it's back. So anyway, I have pulled off the entire shock system and body from the car just to begin. I'm going to go ahead and put these on. I'm not going to do a build video because I'll leave a link in the description to next Roboflex install. But what I will do is I'll just give you a couple of high-res photos and a quick explanation of how they go on, and hopefully it'll save you some time. A few other things I've done since the last video that I did not talk about was I lowered the body mounts a little bit. Just these front body mounts, I dropped them one notch because you get a little bit better, not much, but a couple millimeters lower on the body. And I also had a second battery tray that I took the stock one off. I still have it, but this one has been cut, and what I did was I drilled new holes in it so that I could mount my battery flush with the frame rails, and that does help because it dropped it probably a half a centimeter. So the battery does sit on the motor. It's not a big deal. I've run batteries touching motors for a year. I'm not telling you to do it. If you burn your car up, or your motor up, or your battery up, that's on you, but I do it and it's been fine. So post what you want, but anyway, I'm going to go ahead and install these, and I'll get right back to you. Here's a little bonus footage for you. On these inner control arms where they mount the center ones, not the outer ones, but the center ones, these have to pivot a lot for full articulation, and I don't know why they don't round these edges, and they're pretty square, and when they fit inside this hole they don't want to rotate very easily. So I get out a file or a Dremel tool and I just round out this corner here. I don't get into the plastic where the ball has to be, but this outer edge, if you round that, it doesn't need to be square, and that's square, and square things are hinges, round things rotate, and this is a part that needs to rotate. And one of the other things I do on those inner ones is I'll take and cut the ears off of, let's see this, I cut the little ear parts off of those ball joints. They're not necessary. It gives it a little more play, but it's not a race car, and it doesn't have to have super tight tolerances. It's a crawler, and this is one of those cases where loose tolerances actually are good. So I just put my nail clippers right on that edge part and I round it out. See that? And I cut both of the ears off usually because I don't want that hanging up and preventing free motion. That's how you get a really good crawler, is when it can articulate freely and no binding. I just push them out and they go right back in. You just push the ball back in when you're done, and that's it. Rotate it so that you can put the screw through it again. That's good, and I'll just round that out, and I'll do a quick I'll do that off camera and then I'll show it to you. And that's what it looks like rounded, and I do both sides, and now that will articulate freely in the center. The outer ones don't have to twist so much because they have a longer radius from the center turn point. I'll do the other side and then finish the install. And here's what that does for you. See how these center balls can now pivot? If those are not rounded, it's a hinge and it just moves it up and down, and the corners will prevent it from pivoting. So this is a good mod, and it frees up the suspension a lot, and you'll get a better performance out of it, because on side hilling especially, because if you got enough weight in the nose to hold it level, but then the back won't pivot, it'll try to tip your car. But when it can pivot, it just does, and you don't tip over. I said I wasn't going to do a full build on this, but why not? It's simple. Step one, mount this part right here. Goes your lower body frame, and or your lower battery mount, and use the screws that Nick gave you. They're longer and they need to be, because you got to go through this thing that's probably 3 millimeters wide. When you put screws in through any 3D printed part, you just want to seat them, do not snug them. Seated is fine, that's all you need. When you put this one on, it's ugly side out, because that's the side that prints on. The glassy side is the inside, and this bump needs to be farther back because it's not symmetrical. This is about center, so this is farther back. Step one. Step two, this is the part that goes into the channel. This is the part that I had to get a second deadbolt for, and it mounts back here where the original screws came out of your original shock tower, and they just screw in there. Again, seated only, not snugged. Step two. This is step three. This is your pivot arm for the shock, and when you attach it to that piece you just put on, and this will have to rotate, so leave the screw a little loose. This is your hinge that redirects force from vertical to horizontal, and I'll screw that on. Alright, I'm going to modify what I just said. In Nick's video, which I'm watching, he has this part a little differently modified, and he has rotated it so that it pivots around this screw that you put in. So this part, apparently, once it flips over, I showed you how to install it, but before you tighten it down, apparently this is the orientation it needs to be. So that is the end of step three. This is step four, the part Nick calls a shark blade, and it swims forward, the fin goes up, and when you put it on the rear axle, you put it on like this, according to his video. So I'll screw that on because I need both hands, and this has to pivot somewhat, so don't snug it down. Again, this needs to be a little bit loose for that tolerance. Here's a little note. While doing the other side, I'm noticing that this particular one here is rubbing on that screw, so I'm just going to clearance the inside edge of that right there, just so that that can move freely past the screw. I'm going to take it off and do that real quick. I have not changed the basic shape of it, I just rounded the inside edge so that it'll clear that screw head. I'm back on step three on the other side here. I'm doing them simultaneously, but this one doesn't want to move as freely as the other one did. So I'm going to back the screw off, and if necessary, I'll kind of taper the inside corner. Oh, sorry about that, I moved the camera. I'll taper the inside edge of this and this so that it passes the frame rail a little bit easier. But I have the step four done on the other side, same deal. We're going to work on step five, and I'm going to name one of Nick's pieces a banana link, because it looks like a banana, and it links the shark blade to the pivot arm. So you can put it in one of two places on the shark blade. You've got two mounting holes. I'm going to mount it on the lower of the two because I don't like really high rigs. I want the droop to handle that rather than ride height. Then I can control the droop and not give away too much of my incline performance. So when you mount this, I'll show you. I'll just zip it in here real quick. This is a pivoting joint here, and so you don't want to over tighten that. Don't even snug this one, just ballpark it, and your banana blade bows forward and hooks to this rear arm of the pivot arm, like that. And both of these have to move, so I'll finish up step 5 and then show it to you. Alright, so there's step 5 done. All I've got left to do is hook the shock up. So step 1, mount this part with this bump a little bit farther back, and then I think we put the rail mount on second, then this upper blade, then the fish blade, then the banana blade. I'm going to call this the pivot blade. So front shock mount, pivot blade, shark blade, banana blade. And when you put this together, it likes loose tolerances, because if you have it tight, remember how we talked about how straight angles don't like to pivot? Well, if you get these pieces that are printed with straight edges, if you tighten them close together, they will only pivot and they will not rotate, and you need to have that rotation for the articulation. So I'm going to throw the shocks on. I think that's, I don't know what step I'm on. It's getting late, but the last step. How's that? Step last is just to hook it on. I've decided I think that the orientation of the shock looks the coolest this way. A little dog hair on that, but doesn't hurt it any. I'll just pull it off. And I'll mount the front one here. And again, you can seat this one. Don't snug it. It has a pivot ball, so it's gonna move freely on its own. And then I'm gonna hook this one to the top of this pivot arm. I can press that right against the frame rail, so I can get some good leverage on this. And once again, man, I really appreciate these driver tools. They make working on things so much easier. It's tremendous how much easier it is. That is how it works. And I'm going to put a little grease in this so it works a little more freely. But that's pretty cool. I'll throw the other one on the other side and it'll be done. Alright, I figured out why it's not moving freely. It's because this molded part of the shock is just hitting the edge right here. This outer radius edge piece. So I'm going to round that corner just to make sure that that corner doesn't hit this corner. I just took a little bit of the edge off. I left the meat so it still has its strength, but when I throw the shock back on, it shouldn't bind it anymore. I had to do that same thing on the other side to prevent the binding. And that's one thing about these trucks, is they're so small that they bind very easily, and it's really subtle. You won't even notice it at first. And common places they bind is right here where the end of the battery tray mounts. On the deadbolt, it's actually, if you put a piece of paper between your the left side control arm, if you shove it in between that control arm and your drive shaft, and then you flex it all the way to the full extent on this one wheel, a lot of times it'll grab that paper and won't let you pull it out, because that drive shaft will touch the arm, and it takes a good amount of clearance. And that's why a lot of these trucks bounce when they're trying to turn, is you're actually lumping over these the end yoke here. It's the end yoke is actually hitting the upper control arm left side. So I've noticed that recently. So I take a nail file and I just round out the edges of these. I don't think that square edges on parts that move are good. So I do a lot of rounding on them. I rounded my front edges here, and actually because I did the high clearance link, it sort of changes the geometry a little bit, and I was getting some binding in between this arm and the skid plate, so I clearanced that a bit too. And this thing is ready. I'm going to throw the rear tires on it and take it for a drive. It's all together, and the last step, it looks pretty cool. One thing I do notice is because it provides a little more travel than the stock setup, it puts more leverage on the spring, and with the battery installed, the spring doesn't have enough force to give it any ride height. So I may put some stiffer springs on it, but right now it's running at full droop all the way down, and it doesn't have any spring height on it. It's too heavy for the springs with this setup. I do have a bunch of springs I can try that I've gotten from various kits, and I'm going to drive it first. It may be fine. I know a lot of people run without springs. I don't run without springs because I feel like you get a smoother transition by using them. So I don't see a problem with this due to the fact that I'm not actually going to be sitting in it. It may actually be really good because it is going to ride at the lowest ride height possible, and that droop is available if I need it. So I'm going to compare this to a I'm getting tired here, to the kinetic shock, and just see if it has a comparable droop, and then take it over the course. On this setup, this is one of my buggies that I've done. My original C10 became this, and I love this truck. But anyway, this is the combination for the rear I like the most. I put a flex blade on this with stock shock on the left side because it does not add much torque rise or roll when you're climbing steep. But I have the kinetic on the left side, and what that does is allows this wheel to reach down if I'm trying to go over a tall peak and it hits the frame, and it'll just give me enough droop so that one wheel a lot of times can push me over the top. And Judd, I'm going to put the frame rails at the same height here, and it looks like, well, this is not scientific because I'm eyeballing it. Your kinetic is still going to have the greater travel, but it seems about equal. No, not quite. It's got more travel. It has more travel than a flex blade in droop, but it has less travel than a double barrel kinetic, if that makes sense. Not far off, but it's probably a half a millimeter. So the cantilever shocks are halfway between a flex blade and a double barrel. How's that? All right, let's go run it. All right, I have not driven this even 1 inch yet with the Roboflex cantilever shock set on it yet. So far, so good. And this is kind of a tricky run that you've seen me do before. If you don't get it just right, it's not going to do it. Okay, this will be the first real test of it, and the reason I say that is because this peak here is where you need to have that little bit of extra droop to get it up over the ridge. And it made it before, and it did it fairly easily, but it had to jog to the right a little bit, so I'll try to make that happen again. And we'll just see. I'm staying a little bit more left on purpose. And it looks like it does have just that little bit of extra droop that carried it over pretty nice. Readjust the camera here. Articulation seems okay. And I'm going to manually move this a little bit, and I know that getting over this next ridge right here tends to frame out the bottom. It'll sort of hang up right there. And it did that easier than it did with stock setup. I know that for a fact, because before I couldn't just crawl it up. So that is an improvement over obstacles, 100%. Before I had to kind of bounce it up a little bit because the frame would touch. And that's just maybe a bit of a ride height advantage over stock, but they seem okay. Didn't seem to have a problem at all there. I'm going to do a couple more runs just to verify that everything is as legit as it looks so far. This one can require a bit of flex. That's why I'm going to run it this direction. I was going to talk about what I started to talk about there. There are a lot of modifications people do that I consider just modifications. I don't consider them upgrades. In order for a modification to be an upgrade, it has to improve the performance of something. And I just love how smooth the motor is on this particular track. Alright, look here. I'm going to shut that dryer door, sorry. If you look at the right rear tire and compare it to previous videos going over the same rock, remember how much higher up that was. This has a bit of droop going on with it, and that is probably going to help it out because the whole truck can tip farther before it will lose its center of gravity. So I like that so far. I'll put my tire in the right place. That'll make it over. And I've stuck it. Maybe I'll save it yet. There we go. Alright. So my balance point there. And I want you to see what I've got going on the back here. I've got my camera, sorry about that. My camera's held level, and this thing is kind of on the point where it wants to fall over. I don't think it's going to let it do that. We've seen it dump it here before. That's partly my fault, partly the fact that I did not quite have it tuned the way I wanted it yet. It's all those subtle little things I told you about that cause binding, and when you're side hill crawling and you need every bit of articulation you can get so that the truck doesn't completely lean over, you want the suspension to flex. And oh crap, I dumped it. That was me. Sorry about that. We'll try that one more time. Just to prove I can do this. There we go. That's definitely more flex than it had. And on this course, I don't really see that being a problem. It's good. I kind of want that, just because of the sort of extreme angles I'm running it at. Dropped my stuff all over the place here. Sorry about that. I should have been in bed an hour ago, but I had to do what everybody else wanted me to do tonight, so I didn't get to play with my trucks. I would say that you get more droop with this. Articulation might be a little different, but droop is fine. No problem with that. And there is a bit more articulation. It's not as much as you would get from a set of kinetics, but the kinetic double barrels have their own issues. They overextend and kind of turn the truck into something that's unstable and difficult to control, especially during climbs. Try to take it up over the top here. No problem with that. Alright, this is the last line of the night that I'm going to try. Then I got to go to bed. I should have been in bed an hour and a half ago. That Roboflex kit, coupled with the high clearance links. I'm going to look under there right now. I'm not going to move the camera because when I do, I'll dump the truck by accident. But what you can see there is it has just barely enough clearance to get the links over that rock. I mean, it's practically touching it. So I'll try to get her over the top here, and if that's successful, either way, I gotta go to bed after this. To the side so I can see. I gotta make sure that I'm not gonna tip it over backwards. With extra articulation in the back, it sometimes means you're gonna have a little bit less incline performance trying to climb steep. It'll try to tip itself over, and I'm really kind of too tired to be doing this at the moment, but I'm convinced it can do it. I'll just set it back up there and just finish the run. Not gonna climb the whole thing again. Easy enough. Anyway, that's all for tonight. I do think these are a definite upgrade. They're not just a modification, and you do get quite a bit. That's a good amount of travel increase. But you are running straight down on the springs. If I run stiffer springs, it'll give it a little bit of lift, which is good and bad, but it does sit with a little bit of a rake. The back's just a slightly bit higher than stock, but that can be adjusted. If you take some of the bottom off one of the shark blades, you can see it in Nick's video, you can adjust the ride height quite a bit, but once you do it, it's permanent. So I'll send a link to his video, and that's all I got for tonight. Go out and do some cool crawling or indoors, build your own course, try some stuff, and see what you find out. We'll talk to you later.